housing. The city did have a complaint back in 2004 in regards to the discrimination on the basis of familial status, which is what we also going to go over. So that way we would have an understanding of when we are speaking of developments or housing within the city, that we use the correct wording, so we do not have any sort of cases of discrimination or anything on the basis of familiar status or any sort of protected class through the Fair Housing Act. And part of the constellation agreement was for us to do these sort of trainings and testings as well with the properties within the city. So I just wanted to let you all know this is why we're having those sort of trainings, so we can prevent any sort of future,
It was a council meeting, that had happened, it was council members that were talking about.
Yeah.
So, is it 2004?
Yes, back in 2004, the complaint was in May of 2000. I printed a copy just in case it's like 10 pages, but if you just wanna, just have a basis, I printed copies.
Justine, did
Can you get one? Let me, I'll pass them.
I got it.
yours right here.
No, I don't have a bill.
Will you pass?
Oh, we should pass them all.
Yeah, you could just pass them down, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So everyone could just have a copy, so.
Yeah, that's separate.
Does anyone need more?
Oh, no, it's fine, no, it's great.
I'll pass these down.
I think we got everyone else.
Everyone have what they need.
Why did you get one?
You have two, right? Oh.
Here,
I didn't Mhm. Thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome.
All right, thank you, Rockville, all yours.
Okay. So I want to make a deal with you. I'm going to try to make this presentation and our discussion as interesting as possible. But in exchange, I want y'all to make me look as good as possible so that my boss won't get on me after I leave here today. So if we can sort of have that arrangement, I think we'll get along just fine. But anyway, again, like I said, we're going to talk about the issues. Please know at any point in time, if I say anything or bring up any information that doesn't make any sense or you have questions about, feel free to stop me and we'll address those questions immediately. Of course, if I don't have the answer or Ms. Slender doesn't have the answer, we will jot that down and get back to you as quickly as possible. So one thing I think that some people don't realize, they have the notion that fair housing and the Fair Housing Act sort of was established as a result of the Civil Rights Movement. It came along to its fruition in the 1950s and the 1960s, but that's not quite true. Actually, fair housing was addressed in this country back in the 19th century. Now, was not recognized or acknowledged under the term fair housing, but the issue itself was discussed. Congress visited that matter to make sure or to address the issue after the end of the Civil War. We had over 1 million some slaves and their families that were now without a home. They had been under this paternal system where housing was provided for them, food and clothing, even though it certainly wasn't equal and nothing that anybody would be interested or, want to avail themselves. But however, they were not responsible for their own housing. Now, after the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, we have all these people here in this country trying to establish a home and security for themselves and their families. So Congress, first, under the 14th Amendment, addressed the issue with the Equal Protection Clause, stating that African Americans had equal protection the same as the white citizens of the United States. Then, thereafter, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which really spoke to giving African Americans the right to buy, sell property, buy and sell personal property, the right to enter into contract, purchase homes, the same as the rest of the citizens of this country. So really the issue itself came to light as far back as the 1800s. Now fast forward, bear in mind, even though we had these laws on the books, there really wasn't the will, so to speak, to enforce these laws and to make sure that everyone's rights were protected in their pursuit to obtain and maintain housing. So fast forward to the 1950s, and we started to see people coming together, particularly African Americans, to address some of the inequities and the problems and challenges that they were running into trying to obtain equal rights. We saw it in education, we saw it in employment, and we also saw it in housing. So as a result, there were several things to take place. We saw different pieces of legislation that were passed, but what really kicked things into gear, so to speak, was in the summer of 1967. During that summer, President Lyndon Johnson established a commission. It was called the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. And it was headed up by the governor of Illinois, Otto Kerner. And so it came to be known really as the Kerner Commission. And so they did a study on things that were taking place in the country, race relations, things of that nature. And as a result of that study, they found that the country was moving in the direction of having two societies, one black, one white, one equal, one unequal. And as a result of that, they presented that study and the information to Congress. But Congress had the information, then again, there was not a concerted effort to really take any action based upon the information and the data that had been collected in this study. What really triggered the country to take a positive and a proactive movement to address fair housing was unfortunately the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. He was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. And probably majority of you, or perhaps all of you, may not have even been born or twinkle in your mom's eye at that time. I happened to be in the second grade. So I remember how the country sort of responded to that. And what we saw was quite similar to what we experienced with the murder of George Floyd. Certainly in the inner cities, there were riots. There was just this whole angst that the country was going through. Right across the Potomac here in DC, you saw a lot of the retail establishments up in flames. In most of your major cities, this is what we saw taking place because certainly Black America was upset that one of their leaders had been taken. So Lyndon Johnson, he was like at this point, he was really starting to get frustrated that there was no action and he needed to do something to quell and address the issues that were taken in response to the assassination of Dr. King. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with LBJ, but he had a way of handling things down on Capitol Hill. He had been a senator at one time, and so he knew how to get things done. So he went up there, got things in the gear, and told Congress, look, we need to do something right now to address this issue. And the response was the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Part of that included the provision or the Fair Housing Act, which was Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. So that was the Fair Housing Act. That's when we actually saw the law established. So that's sort of some background, and I wanted to lay that foundation to give you some context and understanding of how it all evolved and why we're here and having to deal with some of these issues here today. So what is fair housing? What does the law, what does it address? The Fair Housing Act speaks to and really addresses any type of discriminatory practices or differential treatment that a person or a group may experience in trying to either purchase a home or rent a dwelling or avail themselves of some type of housing-related service. And they've experienced this as a result of their membership in any one of 7 protected classes. Those protected classes are race, color, religion, national origin, sex being gender, familial status, and disability or handicap. The law actually stipulates handicap, but that word is that term is taboo today, so we really don't use it. We tend to refer to that protected group under the term of disability. But those were the protected classes. At the time when the law was passed, you really only had 4. The initial law stipulated only addressed race, color, religion, and national origin. That was it. However, over time, we saw the remaining 3 also adopted as part of the Federal Fair Housing Act. So we're going to talk about each one of them. However, we're going to spend more time and focus on issues related to familiar status. Now, bear in mind, the Federal Fair Housing Act covers everything. Everywhere from coast to coast, Atlantic to the Pacific, Hawaii, Alaska, and all the republics. So anywhere you go in this country, you have protections under the Federal Fair Housing Act, regardless of whether you're in New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, California, Chicago, Illinois, Houston, Texas, Tupelo, Mississippi. I don't care where you are. Here in Falls Church, you have protections under the Federal Fair Housing Act. Now, bear in mind, even though we have a federal law, individual states, municipalities, counties can establish their own fair housing laws. Now, there is not so much of a catch, but even though individual states or municipalities can establish their own fair housing laws, they must adopt and recognize the 7 protected classes that are recognized under the federal law. They cannot eliminate or delete any of the 7. They can add as many protected groups as they wish. So here in the state of Virginia, not only do you have the 7 protected classes of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familiar status, and disability, you also have elderliness, which provide protections for people 55 years of age and older, sexual orientation, gender identity, military status, and source of funds. Now, in Fairfax, they have an additional protected group under marital status as well. Here in Fairfax County, I think in addition to the 7 protected groups recognized under the federal law, you also have marital status. I believe that's right.
You're saying in Falls Church?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm so used to it. Yeah, here in Falls Church, you have marital status.
We added source of funds like
Yes,
3 years ago.
right.
I don't remember adding marital.
Yeah, that was statewide.
Yeah, it became incorporated as a result of that.
So we may not have, do we have marital status?
Well, you have that under your individual ordinance.
Okay.
However, you're still required to recognize those protections under the state, because again, those protected classes are recognized statewide. So wherever anyone is, they still have those additional protected groups that are recognized under the state as well as the federal government. But I wanted to point out that the fact that municipalities, counties, as well as states, they can adopt fair housing laws and add as many additional protected groups as they wish. You go out to California, and they really pride themselves on being so progressive. You go to San Francisco or LA, they may have as many as 20-some protected groups. And I can't name them all, and I'm not gonna begin to, but I'm just saying, just in case you happen to move someplace else and you wanna become mayor of Baltimore or some other city, be sure to make sure you understand whatever, but see, first of all, if they have any laws related to fair housing, if so, then you can, familiarize yourself with any protected groups that may be recognized in that particular locale. All right. So let's talk briefly about the protected groups. Race is easy. Don't have to spend a whole lot of time on that. Race basically speaks to the fact that someone cannot deny someone housing or wait a minute. Wait, for 1 second, let me back up for a moment and circle back to the law itself, because there is one point I would like to make. It's easy to understand that no one can deny someone housing based on who is trying to purchase a home or who's trying to rent a dwelling. But the law also speaks to the fact that people have rights as it relates to them trying to avail themselves of some housing-related service. So I'm going to sort of throw this out to you what do you think of some housing-related services that housing providers here in Falls Church may provide? Let's look at it from, the rental housing perspective. What are some housing-related services that an apartment complex would provide to their tenants?
Rental assistance.
Okay, rental assistance, excellent. So let's just say for the sake of discussion, I'm applying for rentals, I'm coming to an apartment complex, you're the apartment, you're the landlord, and I have rental assistance, and then this young lady here, what's your name, ma'am?
Caroline?
Miss Caroline, she's applying too, and so she has rental assistance. So let's just say for the sake of discussion, you accept my application paperwork for the rental assistance. However, you won't accept hers because of her membership in one of the protected groups. If that happens, you will potentially have violated her rights under the law because rental assistance is a housing-related service. What are some other those? What are some really standard ones we see in apartment complexes and rental housing?
Like price of rent or amenities,
Okay, so what type of amenities? Very
main
good.
access,
Swimming pool.
yeah,
Oh,
swimming pool,
Okay, access to
gym,
the swimming pool, so that's an amenity. So let's
access
say
to
you're
the
the
front
landlord,
door.
you're the landlord, and you have this multifamily housing apartment complex. And for some reason, you know, you have it in for men. So you stipulated and adopted a policy that men can only have access to your swimming pool on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 1 to 5 p.m. But women and children have access anytime the pool is open. I move to the complex, I wanna use the pool, but I can't use it on the weekend because based on your policy, I only have access 3 days out of the week for a limited time. And if that's the case, then you will have violated my rights because I'm a male, meaning sex, and that would be a violation under the Fair Housing Act or the local Fair Housing Law. Well, what's a big one? What do you, I don't know when the last time any of you may have rented an apartment, but if you have problems with something not working, what do?
Supervisor.
For what? For maintenance. Maintenance is a huge one. So if that rental office or the manager either ignores or delays providing maintenance service to a tenant, and they do so because of that tenant's membership in one of the protected classes, they will have violated that person's rights. So any type of housing-related service is covered under the law. So that's on the rental side. Let's look at it on the home purchasing side. So let's say for the sake of discussion, Ms. Caroline, you said?
Yes.
Ms. Caroline is a realtor, and I'm interested in moving here to Falls Church. So she's working with me, she's helped me find the home. We found a nice home here in Falls Church, costs $450,000. Well, unlike many of you, I'm not flush with cash. I don't have deep pockets, so I just can't pay outright and buy that home. So I need to do what? Borrow the money. So I go and talk to Ms. Slender, she's the banker there at the Slender Savings and Loan, and I'm working with her to try to get a loan to purchase the home. Well, if she imposes conditions upon me or declines my application for that loan because of my membership in any of those protected classes, she will have violated my rights, because if I can't get the loan, I can't purchase the home. So banks, lending institutions, they provide a housing-related service. So let's just say everything goes smooth with Ms. Slender. She's willing to give me the loan. However, what does she want to do? Protect her interests, protect her collateral. So how's she gonna go about doing that?
Charge you a higher rate.
I'm sorry?
Charge you a higher rate.
I hope not. No, she's gonna charge me the same rate, but she wants to protect her collateral. So what she wants to do for me to do that is require me to get homeowners insurance. So you're the insurer. What's your name, ma'am?
Mary Beth.
Miss Mary Beth is the insurer. I go to her to get homeowners insurance. I say, Miss Mary Beth, I'm interested in purchasing a home here in Falls Church. I've talked to the banker, they're willing to give me a loan, however, I need homeowners insurance. Well, again, if she denies me homeowners insurance or puts extra conditions or burdens upon me to try to get that insurance, and she's doing this as a business practice because of my membership in any one of those protected classes, she will have violated my rights. Because if I can't get that homeowner's insurance, I can't get the loan. If I can't get the loan, I can't buy the home. So any type of housing-related service is also covered under the Act. So those are a couple of examples to help you understand sort of how the law applies. Now, getting back to the protected classes, race is easy. Race basically speaks to inherited, biological, or physical attributes. So again, if I'm trying to rent an apartment from Ms. Carolyn here, and she denies me based upon the fact that I'm an African American, that's easy. She will violate my rights. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that. The thing that I want to point out, though, is race and color so many times, at least I've seen, they get conflated. People will come and say, look, I want to file a complaint based on, you know, that person, they mistreated me, they discriminated against me because of the color of my skin. That may be the case, but more times than not, what we see, the case is more race-based than speaking to color. Color speaks to the complexion of someone's skin, not their biological attributes or characteristics. So let's just say, for the sake of discussion, I'm the landlord, and I have an apartment complex, and the young lady here, she comes to rent, she's interested in renting an apartment in my complex, but she's a little lighter complexion than I am. And I'm like, you know what? I get tired of these light-skinned people, they get on my nerves. So I make it difficult for her. And I tell her, well, you're gonna have to pay an extra deposit. I'm not letting her know or tell her altogether, I'm sorry, we don't have anything here, you need to go down the street. Well, if I denied her housing or made it difficult for her to obtain housing because of the complexion, the color of her skin, then I will have violated her rights. That's the difference between race and color. Next is national origin. National origin speaks to the ethnicity of someone or where their family may have descended upon. It also addresses issue where people may speak in their native tongue other than English. So again, I'm going to use myself as an example. I have an apartment complex. A gentleman comes in and we're talking about, you know, his interest in trying to rent an apartment for him and his family. And during the course of the discussion, we're just having a little small talk chat. And I said, you know, I noticed you have an accent, you know, where do you live? Where are you from? He said, oh, I'm from, we moved here from Russia. I said, well, how long you been? Oh, we've been here about 10 years. Oh, Russia. You know, I can't stand that Vladimir Putin. He gets on my nerves. He's interfering in our elections and doing this and the other. So I make it difficult for him and his family to move into the complex. Or I tell them, I'm sorry, you know what? Mister, you need to go down the street. We don't have any vacancies here. If I make it difficult for him or decline or deny him housing based upon his ethnicity because he's Russian, I will have violated his rights. The same will hold true for any type of housing provider that may have a policy that if you're going to do business with us, you have to speak English. So if they come into, let's just say, the rental office and someone, they're not well-versed in speaking English and they're speaking in their native tongue, and that apartment complex say, get out. No, look, if you don't speak English, I'm not dealing with you. If they're not sympathetic or at least sensitive to the matter and at least try to work with that individual, that can be a potential violation. Now, of course, there are some smaller landlords, they may not have anyone on staff to assist them in that manner. So what we try to recommend and encourage them to do is to see if that person has someone else in their family, the person who's coming in, the tenant or the resident, has someone in their family to help them translate. Or try to see if there's some alternative that they can take advantage of to help them communicate with that individual. But if they just have a strict policy of English only, that's going to be an issue. That's a slippery slope, and that's going to be a problem. Any questions about internet so far? All right, y'all are smart people. Great. So the fourth protected group that was adopted in 1968 was religion. Religion, you say, okay, that's pretty easy. We don't have to spend a lot of time on that. You can't mistreat, deny, or treat someone differently because of whatever faith or religion they practice. And this is true. So if someone comes to me and I'm your housing provider, I have an apartment complex, and I deny them housing because they're Catholic, or because they're Jew, or because they're Muslim, then I will have violated their rights. But it not only addresses or speaks to people who practice a particular faith. If they don't practice any faith at all, it also offers protection for them as well. So let's go back to my example again. I'm a housing provider, I have a rental office, someone comes in there interested in renting an apartment room. During the course of the discussion, I just sort of as part of the conversation, I asked them, well, what church you go to? And they say, oh, you know what, hey, Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry, I really don't do that church thing, you know, no disrespect to you, but that's just not my thing. And so while discussing, I said, well, you know what, I understand, but you really need to reconsider. You know, it would really help you. You know, I would hate to see you die and go to hell. Well, if I make that a condition of their housing and they have to rent from me, and I impose that on them, I will have again violated their rights under the Fair Housing Act. And of course, my explanations may be a bit over the top, but I'm just sharing this so that you can get a full understanding of how the law applies. So if someone is agnostic, or they're atheists, or if they practice some religion that is not recognized or that we readily recognize in society, again, that housing provider cannot use that as a basis to deny them housing or impose certain conditions upon them. Now, what we see typically from time to time with these types of cases is not so much that someone is denied housing because of their faith that they practice. It's in the way that they practice their faith, particularly in an apartment complex. They may have some religious symbol on their door or inside their apartment. And the apartment complex may have certain policies about having symbols displayed. Now, if they have a policy where they say, okay, you can't have any symbols or any items displayed on your door, they're within their right to do so as long as they are consistent in the way that they enforce it. They can't single out someone because of their faith or whatever religion that they ascribe to say, okay, you have to take that cross down, or you have to take the Star of David down off your door. They have to be consistent to say everyone in their complex is prohibited from hanging anything on their door. Otherwise, if they single out people who practice a certain faith, again, that's a slippery slope, and it can cause them problems and has the potential of being a violation of that person's rights. Now, if they have some symbol inside their apartment, that tenant should be within their right to do so, unless it causes some type of safety hazard or it's going to compromise the integrity of the structure itself. But other than that, there should be no reason why someone can have some symbol or something in their unit. Now, of course, if a part of their religion, if they're in there sacrificing a goat, then that's going to be a problem. And again, not only would that be an issue as it relates to fair housing, but it's going to be a health and safety issue that they can call the police about. All right. So moving right along. During that time frame in the 60s, the late 50s and the 60s, we started to see my generation take a more active presence here in this country. I'm sort of on the back end of the cusp of the baby boomer generation. And so my generation took a totally different perspective to sort of societal norms and practices. People in my parents' generation, especially when it came to issues related to relationships like marriage, my parents' generation, they would stay together as a family unit, even though there may have been some marital discord, if no more than for the sake of the children. People in my generation took a totally different approach. If there was some issue, We had no problem saying, okay, you go your way, I go my way, and we'll live happily ever after. So you saw more divorce. Also, you saw more women coming out of college that were going into the workforce, where in the prior generation, you had women in college, but a lot of times they would get married and would become homemakers. So there weren't as many women who were out there single needing housing. My generation, you really started to see a turn where more women, as a result of going into the workforce, getting jobs, were needing places to live, and a lot of times they were single and needed to find housing. Well, this presented a problem, because if they tried to purchase a home, that banker, that mortgage company would deny. I'm sorry, can't give you a loan. If you get pregnant, what's gonna happen? You'll be out anywhere from 4 to, who knows, 9 months. Who's gonna pay the mortgage? Who's gonna pay this note? So they were being denied. And they had no recourse whatsoever. Same held true with those women who weren't able to purchase a home but still needed housing and were looking to try to rent a dwelling, rent a home. They were being put in a position where either the landlord was hitting on them, making a proposition for them to obtain housing, or once they moved and obtained that rental unit, the maintenance man was hitting on them. Sometimes the landlord was hitting on them, saying, okay, yeah, I'll take care of your problem if you go out with me on a date, or even worse, if you sleep with me. And this was real. And so you started to see women take a stronger position in obtaining their rights. We saw the equal rights amendment being pushed. And so they really, put pressure on Congress to address that issue as it related to housing. And with that, Congress added sex as a protected class. So now you have 5 protected groups: race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. Now, the thing that I want you to understand as it relates to sex, there are basically 2 theories or disciplines under the law that we see with complaints that are filed with individuals who are saying that they've been in some way mistreated or discriminated against based upon sex. The first, one is hostile environment. Hostile environment is someone comes in, or let me jump back and go back to my example again. I'm a landlord. Miss Carolyn comes in, and I make comments to her about, oh, you're looking pretty today, or I really like that dress. And I keep making these comments, and she states, look, Mr. Higgins, look, I'm just only here to pay the rent or let you know I need a maintenance issue. I don't feel comfortable. I need you to stop. If I continue, and certainly in a way that it creates a difficult, awkward position for her, she can file a complaint against me because I'm creating a hostile environment in which she's having to navigate in. So that's one theory of discipline that we take complaints under, hostile environment. The second is quid pro quo. And I would imagine most of you understand what that is. What does that mean? A favor for a favor. And so what you would see is, again, where a person is trying to either obtain housing or maintain housing, and in doing so, they are running into challenges because the housing provider or someone on staff is putting them in a position where there are conditions placed on them. You can either obtain housing or maintain your housing or get some type of housing-related service if you do some favor for me. And what I share with people, there are times where people may think that does not exist anymore here in 2024, and that could not be further from the truth. I share over and over again that I had a case that I dealt with that was filed in my office when I was living in Texas, where a young lady moved from she moved from the Northeast, and she was in her early 20s, 21 or 22, and when she moved to the city, she moved in with her brother. Well, there was some issue that they had a falling out, so she had to leave his place and she had to go out on her own. She didn't have anybody else in the city. She had a spotty credit history, so she could not really qualify for housing at a nice apartment complex. She ended up finding housing at a boarding house. And for those of you who are familiar or unfamiliar, boarding house, where the bedrooms are rented out, the tenants or residents there, they share the common areas, bathroom, living room area, and the kitchen. So she was able to find housing there. Now, the landlord who owned this particular boarding house, he had two, and he had hired a friend of his to sort of manage, go by the house, you know, every other day or so to make sure everything was running properly and to collect rent when rent was due. This guy, he had done some time for some little minor offense, but, you know, again, he had established a friendship and he had this relationship with the landlord. So the landlord gave him a job, I guess trying to give him a chance. Well, the young lady, she moved in February of 2017. She was able to pay the security deposit and February's rent. Next month, March came up. She paid March's rent. Now, toward the middle of March, or toward the end, between the middle and the end of March, she approached the manager, we're gonna call him Mr. Smith. She said, Mr. Smith, look, I need to let you know something. I'm gonna be short on April's rent. I don't have all the money, but I promise you I will have it by the end of the month. I'll pay you all the late fees that are associated with it, but I need to let you know now, I'm not gonna have the money on the first. Well, she was telling him that because she was afraid that she would be evicted, and she was young, she really didn't know the process and what it all entailed, but she was just trying to protect herself from being put out on the street. She didn't have money enough to get back home, so this is all she had. So she approached him trying to be upfront and honest, telling him, look, she was gonna be short. So he said, well, okay, thank you for telling me. I tell you, yeah, I'll be glad to work with you on this. I tell you what we're gonna do. You're gonna do this little favor for me and sleep with me, and we'll cover it and you'll be done. Well, she was reluctant, but she was afraid. She was down there by herself. She couldn't turn to her brother because they weren't even speaking to each other anymore. So she agreed, engaged in that one act with him, paid off the balance of her rent for April. So then May came up. She paid May's rent on time, in full. So the manager, Mr. Smith, comes to her again. He said, okay, you know, it's time for our little arrangement. She said, what arrangement? He said, you know that deal we entered into. You know, each month now, you know, you're gonna have to put out. She was like, whoa, wait a minute. No, I only agreed to do that because I was short on April's rent. He said, oh, no, darling. This is gonna be our arrangement for the rest of your tenancy. So she drew a line and dug in and said, no, we're not doing it. I'm done with this. Now, she didn't move out because she didn't have any place else to go. She said, I'm not agreeing to this anymore. Well, he took it out on her. He retaliated to the extent he took the door off her bedroom. He would enter her room at odd hours and engage in heinous acts in front of her. And so someone had advised her to file a complaint against him and the landlord with the Fair Housing Office, which we took the complaint. We investigated. As a matter of fact, I assigned several investigators on that case. And as a result, again, she filed in 2017, around the summer or fall of 2017. The case finally went to trial here early this year. And they were able to get a judgment against the landlord and the manager in the amount of $147,000. So again, no amount of money is worth that, but I'm sharing that with you to inform you, these things still take place today. We still have people out here taking advantage of those who are vulnerable, those who are weak. So that's why it's important that not only agencies like ours and yours remain vigilant, but even council members like you stay abreast and know what's going on so that you can make sure that your constituents and your residents are protected from people who are preying on those who are weak and vulnerable. So again, those are the two theories that we see: hostile environment, quid pro quo. Now, the one thing that I do want to share with you, in January of 2021, the Biden administration issued an executive order. I think it was Executive Order 13988. And what that order mandated was all federal agencies were to go in, look at their policies, procedures, and guidelines to make sure that they were not discriminatory against people based upon their sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status. So every federal agency was mandated with going in to scrub and really do a deep dive to look at all of their policies and practices to make sure they weren't discriminatory as it related to that particular group. Because bear in mind, people in that subcategory under sex, they had no protections under the Federal Fair Housing Act. So as a result of that, HUD is a federal agency. They have reciprocating or agreements with various agencies that are located either at the state level or the local municipality level to make sure that they are helping HUD to enforce the fair housing rights. Our agency is one such agency. We're a FAP agency. We've been granted substantial equivalency, meaning that we are substantially equivalent with HUD, meaning our policies and practices as it relates to fair housing are basically the same as the federal government. So HUD was looking at their policies, and what they did, they issued a mandate to all agencies like that, stating that you now need to look at your policies as it relates to your fair housing ordinance and your enforcement practices. Going forward, you may now take complaints from individuals who state or claim that they have been discriminated or treated differently in some manner because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status. Again, prior to that executive order, we had authority to do so under the state law, but there were no protections under the federal law. So now this group had protections throughout the entire country. So I share that to let you know that not only is it the state that has protections now, we have also, how much time do I have? 10 minutes? My God, okay. So let me jump right, I didn't realize they're going, okay, so I do apologize. The next group that I want to talk about, and I want to jump to right quick, is disability. Disability deals with naturally people disabled. The thing I want to make a distinction between is people conflate and get confused the difference between the American with Disabilities Act versus the rights of people under the Fair Housing Act. The ADA or the American with Disabilities Act only has jurisdiction to deal with issues of discrimination as it relates to employment and public accommodations, where the Fair Housing Act provides protections for the disabled as it relates to their housing. So that's the distinction between the two. For someone to have standing to bring a complaint, they have to be able to prove and establish that they're in fact disabled. Under the law, to be disabled or qualify as being disabled, the law basically states that a person is disabled if they experience or suffer a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So if I'm seeing impaired, the fact that I wear glasses and I need them to read, I qualify as being disabled. Even though I am not blind, it substantially limits a major life activity because some things I can't see without these glasses. If I'm partially deaf, even though I may hear some things, I qualify because it substantially limits a major life activity. If I have mobility issues, or if I suffer with some type of mental impairment, be it depression, PTSD, mental retardation, that all qualifies as a disability under the Act. So I wanted to share that with you. But I need to move right along in the interest of time. I want to talk to you briefly about source of funds, which is also covered under state law, which you're responsible for the enforcement and compliance of as well. Basically, source of funds speaks to protections for people who are using some type of alternative source of funding, legal source of funding, other than what someone would claim that they are using based on, let's just say, a 9-to-5 job. So if someone is using SSDI disability payments, or if they're using alimony or child support as part of their income to qualify, that must be recognized now under the law, but it must be a legal source of funds. It also protects those who are using rental assistance to pay their rent. Section 8 voucher holders are now protected and can go anywhere and use that as a means to qualify for renting a dwelling or renting a home or an apartment. So again, under state law, anyone who is using a legal source of funds can qualify, and that cannot be used against them to either deny them housing or have extra conditions placed upon them. So if I come to you and I go to an apartment complex and I'm a Section 8 voucher holder, they can require me to pay an additional or higher security deposit, or they cannot have me go through a different set of procedures to qualify to rent there as they would someone who is not using some type of alternative source of funds. But bear in mind, it must be a legal source of funds. Brief example, let's just say for the sake of discussion, I get disability payments. The apartment is $1,500. My disability payment is only for $900. That money alone will not qualify me to meet their income requirements. However, on the side, I sell drugs. And from the sale of drugs, I've made well over $250,000, and I got that money in the bank. So I have enough money to qualify, and I can provide that money to that housing provider to show I have enough funds to qualify for whatever their income requirements are. However, that source of funds is illegal. So even though I have the money to pay, I would not be able to, under the law, qualify to use source of funds as a means to be able to qualify to rent that unit. So that's the distinction. It has to be a legal source of funds. So let's pivot there and turn your attention to familiar status as a protected class. That's certainly an important issue here. Familiar status deals with families and households with children 17 years of age and younger. So, a family with a child cannot be denied housing or impose certain conditions because they have a child. I don't know if any of you are really familiar with the rental housing industry, but there was a time, and you still may hear today, where landlords would say, no, I'm not renting families with kids. Those kids coming in just as bad as they can be, and they'll tear up my apartment, they'll tear up my unit, and I'm not renting to families with children. And there was a time when they were being turned away with no impunity whatsoever, and they had no recourse. So again, they approached Congress because their housing options were limited as to where they could go, particularly if they were trying to find rental housing. So Congress added familiar status as a protected class. Now, it not only speaks to your traditional nuclear family of a parent and a child, it can be a grandparent who's raising a child. It can be an aunt or an uncle who's raising a child, and that's part of their household. It can be an older sibling who is raising their younger sibling as part of their household. It can be an adoptive household, foster parents who have children. It also offers protections to someone who's pregnant with a child. They can claim, if they're being denied housing based upon the fact that they're pregnant, they can state, look, and file a claim based upon the protection of familiar status. So that's important to note. Now, under familiar status, I want to cover basically 3 components of that. One of the major issues that we see from time to time deals with occupancy. And most municipalities have a standard rule of 2 people per bedroom based upon the square footage of a particular unit. And this applies to most multifamily housing complexes. So you will find these provisions most of the time in your code ordinance, and they have it there for a reason. It's to address health and safety issues for the residents of their city. So what we hear time and time again, if someone files a complaint based on familiar status and they're being turned away because they have more than the number that's stipulated of being 2 people per bedroom. Let's just say you have a family of 3 and they were in a 1-bedroom or they're applying for a 1-bedroom, and that housing provider says, well, I can't rent that 1-bedroom to you because there are 3 people in your household. Well, it's because of occupancy. Now, when we go out and investigate complaints of that nature, that housing provider is gonna say, well, why are you trying to hold me accountable for that? It's you, city, that imposed this upon us. You're the one that has this law, 2 people per bedroom. And they're right. However, there's a distinction between what's required to address health and safety issues versus particularly the federal law and the issues that they're trying to address to help families. So many times, families, particularly young families, they have fixed incomes and they don't have the means to be able to upgrade. So what the law, the Fair Housing Act or local fair housing ordinance is trying to do is find a way to not create a burden on families with children, because they have enough to deal with as it is in trying to raise a family. So what the law is trying to do is say, let's look at this to see, is there a way that we can accommodate, so to speak, families with children without trying to create an extra burden upon them and limit their housing options? So when we talk about issues of occupancy, the federal level came up with guidelines that agencies like ours, as well as housing providers, are encouraged to look at and implement when it comes to issues of occupancy. The former secretary, Frank Keating, developed some factors or guidelines to look at anytime you have issues related to so many people per bedroom, particularly when we're talking about children. And so those factors include the size of the unit, the configuration of that unit itself that the family is living in or trying to rent, the size of the family, the ages and size of the children. So let's go back to the example of, we have a family of 3, husband, wife, and a child. And let's just say the child is a baby. Well, if the apartment they're applying for is a 1-bedroom, does it make sense to impose a burden on this family to have to rent a 2-bedroom apartment when they just have a small child? In some instances, in a lot of instances, they're gonna have that child in the bedroom with them anyway. So it's not like they're gonna put him in the 2nd bedroom. So we look at issues like that to say, okay, we understand that you have rules and that you're trying to be in compliance with the local city or county's code ordinance as it relates to the configuration and the number of people that you can have in a unit. But bear in mind, anytime you have a local or state law, those of you certainly with legal backgrounds know that the federal law 9 times out of 10 is going to trump that local municipality's ordinance or the state law. So even though we're talking about an ordinance that says, okay, you can only have 2 people per bedroom, when an agency like ours or if your municipality is looking at an issue related to occupancy, you're going to have the discretion to address that issue to say, okay, well, we understand why you're doing it. However, we think that you need to reconsider and make an adjustment here. Now, it doesn't happen in each and every instance. We're not saying that you must allow a family that's more than that stated 2 people per bedroom to move in. You look at the various factors, and it's found in the Federal Register, so we provided you with a copy of the Keating memo. And it goes through, it's very simple, not a lot of legalese, to set out and show you sort of the exercise that you go through to see if that housing provider is being too strict in its application of that two persons per bedroom policy. So again, you look at the size of the unit, the configuration of the unit, the size of the family. So let's just say we have a family of 5, husband, wife, 3 children. One of the children is an infant, the other 2, one is 5 and the other is 2. So we have 5 and they want to move into a 2-bedroom. Well, under the 2 people per bedroom rule, they wouldn't qualify because you have 5 people. However, if we're looking at the size of the family, we have a husband and wife and an infant. We have 2 small children, 1 5 and 1 3. Does it really make sense to impose this burden upon them or make them have to pay more money or tell them that, I'm sorry, we can't rent to you because we have this strict policy of 2 people per bedroom? Under the circumstances, no. So we look at these not as a hard and fast rule, but we look at them on a case-by-case basis. So again, I encourage you to familiarize yourself, at least take a look at it to get an understanding of how this guideline is utilized to address issues related to occupancy. Now, there are certain exceptions that come into play when we're talking about familiar status. Senior properties that are in programs to provide housing for senior citizens, that is the one instance or the one situation where they can deny a family with children. But there are certain aspects that must be present if they're to do so. So 55 properties that offer housing for people 55 and older, therefore anyone that qualifies, they must have at least one person in that unit that's 55 and older. And the occupancy rate in that building must be at least 80% of that household. Anything less than that, then there is some discretion and leeway as to whether a family with children that does not comprise someone 55 or older to be a part of that household. Again, that complex must have 80% of their units rented out to households that has at least one person in it that's 55 years of age or older. Now, there's a second category of senior housing for people 62 years of age and older. Under that scenario, 100% of those units must be occupied by a household with someone 62 years of age or older. Anything less than that, someone with a family with children that has no one of that age may be able to come in and rent in that complex under the policy. And this is designated at the federal level. These are programs that are created to provide housing for those people who are now in retirement age and may not be working anymore to provide affordable housing for them. So again, I think you have a handout that, if you could hold it up for them and look down there, that addresses that information as well. Now, one thing that also comes up as it relates to families with children are if you have certain zoning ordinances or if municipalities or cities have certain policies in terms of how they either implement or provide affordable housing grants to developers to build multifamily housing. If those policies are created and drafted in a way that have a discriminatory impact or a disparate impact on families with children, that's going to create a slippery slope for that municipality. You want to have housing available throughout your city, regardless of what neighborhood, so that people that have children feel welcome to be able to qualify and live there the same as someone who does not have children in there as part of their household. If there's certain, I'm trying to think of a good example here where what exactly came up during the course of the complaint matter that was filed here, if you can share that?
It is on page 2. It was during, the development, marketing, and sale of housing units at the Broadway. What the complaint was, that they wanted for the city to amend the zoning laws, that under the zoning laws, mixed-use developments or those with commercial and residential purposes were not permitted in the city of Falls Church. So part of the complaint was based on how it was zoned, that it was not welcoming to families with children.
So
That is on
again,
page 2 and
Also
3.
the school impact
Yes,
club.
Like a
So-
surcharge for kids that went over a limit of a certain
Yes.
number.
it was a 50,000 excess school discharge.
so again, you don't wanna have ordinances or laws or even policies that would restrict or limit or have a disparate impact, meaning a negative impact, burdening families with children or preventing them to be able to avail themselves of housing anywhere in the city. They should have the same access and ability to move into a neighborhood the same as anyone who may not have children. I want to sort of drill it down and make it simple. Let's just say for the sake of discussion, I buy a mid-rise building here in Falls Church. It was once a building for commercial establishment for business offices. Well, those business offices, the climate and everything wasn't good, so they went out of business. The building's up for sale. I buy it and I said, well, you know, it's an opportunity. I can provide housing, make a little money on the side. So I purchased the building. It's 20 stories high. I'm gonna convert them to condominiums and I'm gonna sell them. And what I'm gonna do is have it a mixed-use building. It's gonna be commercial establishments on the ground level, but floors 2 through 20 are gonna be condominiums. All the same configuration, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, same size, everything the same on each of those units. Now bear in mind, each of those units have a balcony and has a railing outside. People can go outside, enjoy the ambience of Falls Church. So a family comes, they're interested, they moved here to Virginia for a job, government job. So they came in, they said, well, you know, we like Falls Church, it's nice here, quiet, like the neighborhoods, feel welcomed here. So they come to my condominium. I have 3 units available. One on the 9th, that is still for sale. I've sold all the rest. I have one on the 19th floor, one on the 14th floor, and one on the 2nd floor that are still available for sale. So the McIntyre family, they come. Husband and wife, they have 2 little boys. 1 4 and 1 2. Typical little boys. Cute as they can be, but rambunctious. Oh, they're just all over the place. So they come in and I take them to see 3 of the units because they said they're interested in possibly purchasing. So we go to see the one on the 19th floor. We go to see the one on the 14th floor. To go to see the one on the 2nd floor. After reviewing and allowing them to see each of those units, we bring them back down to my office. I say, what do you think? They said, well, man, Mr. Higgins, we really like it. We like sort of, you know, there's a park across the street we can take our kids to. I think we want to purchase. I'm like, oh, great, I got the perfect unit for you right here on the 2nd floor. You love it. And they're like, well, yeah, that one was nice, but, you know, we really prefer to purchase the one on the 19th floor. We'd be up and could see the skyline and just take in the total ambience of Falls Church. And I said, well, I really would like to sell that one to you, but you know what, I'm really afraid. You know, if your boys, if they were to fall off over that balcony, I really couldn't live with myself. You know, they could end up dead. And so I tell them, no, I can't sell you that unit. And so they say, okay, well, we'll take the one on the 14th floor. Again, I said, boy, you know what? It's still pretty high up, and that balcony, I just, you know, even though it's secure, the kids could climb over to something, they fall, they hurt themselves. I couldn't live with myself. I just can't do it. But look, I'll sell you the one right here on the 2nd floor. You can have that. We can work out the paperwork, and look, we'll go to closing, and you'll be in by next month. Well, they walk away disappointed. They don't want that one. They wanted to purchase either the one on the 19th or 14th floor. So they go down the street to they call HUD. And they say they want to file a complaint. Can you believe that? They want to file a complaint against me and say that I discriminated against them. Based on what? Based on familiar status, they claim I wouldn't sell them a unit because they had children. So HUD does the investigation, they send the investigator out, he talks to me. They say, yeah, the McIntyre family said that they wanted to purchase, one of your condos and you wouldn't sell it to them because they had children. I said, well, wait a minute, that's not true. I was gonna sell them the one on the second floor. They were the ones that declined to say that they weren't interested. They said, well, they claimed they made an offer to purchase the one on the 19th or either the 14th floor. I said, yeah, well, that's true. And I take the investigator up to see the units. I said, look how high out this is. I said, do you know they have little boys? Have you seen the kids? The investigator said, yeah. I said, well, they're pretty active. And boy, I just couldn't live with myself if they hurt themselves. And so I told them, no, I can't tell you this one, but I'll be glad to say the one on the second floor. So the investigator, he completes the investigation, writes it up, and makes a recommendation. What do you think they find? In favor of me or the McIntyre family?
The McIntyre
family.
How many of you think that they find in favor of the family? Whoa, wait a minute, time out. I don't think y'all heard what I said. I did not deny them housing. I was willing to sell them the one on the second floor, so I didn't deny them housing. The only reason why I was not in agreement with selling them the one up on the 19th and the 14th floor was because I was concerned that their children may hurt themselves. And that's the only reason why. But I never denied them housing. I offered to sell them a home. So now that you really heard the facts, let's revisit this again. What do you think the outcome was? Do you think that HUD found in favor of the McIntyres or me? Again, why? How did you reach that conclusion?
You were deciding what safety, you were denying them based upon a decision you made about their safety.
Oh, very good. I don't have the authority or the right, even though I may be sympathetic to the situation, that's not my place to make that decision for them. As long as they qualify and they want to live there, I don't have the right because I'm concerned about the health, welfare, and safety of their children to deny them that right. Very good, very good. So again, we need to be cognizant about, even if we think we're doing it for the best of reasons, how we structure policy, how we have guidance in place that's going to negatively impact or limit someone's ability to be able to have access to housing. The last piece that I want to address as it relates to housing is this. Particularly multifamily housing complexes, because they have amenities, a lot of times they have rules in place to protect their residents, particularly children. And we've seen it more times than not that they have swimming pools. So they don't have a rule, justifiably folks, so stating anyone 18 years of age, 17 years of age are prohibited or can't be in the pool without an adult or a parent. We understand why they have the rule. Kids play, they run around, they're active, they can hurt themselves, they can drown. So they're trying to protect the children, and they also, these complexes are trying to protect themselves from liability. However, that's a real slippery slope, and the law itself, Fair Housing, has put some parameters in place to try to help housing providers address that issue. So under Fair Housing, you can have a bright line in terms of stating a certain age group. You have to lower it, and a good range is anywhere between 10 and 12 years of age, but you want to make that policy or rule generic that it does not directly impact or speak to families with children. So what our office always encourage or share with housing providers, they can have a rule that states something like this. Anyone 12 years of age or younger must be accompanied by someone who can respond to an emergency. That way, it does not directly speak to and say they must be accompanied by their parent or they must be accompanied by an adult. Because what we hear time and time again, particularly coming into this time of the year during the summer when school is out, parents are working and they're saying, look, I can't be there to take my child to the pool. I work, or either my child's a lifeguard or my child can swim. They don't need me to be there. Now we all know you can drown in a bathtub full of water or a sink full of water. But still, to try to bring some common sense to the issue itself, we need to help housing providers develop and craft and draft a rule or policy that's generic and framed in a way that does not put them in the crosshairs of fair housing. So even if they have an exercise room, you say, no one 10 years of age or younger, anyone 10 years of age or younger must be accompanied by someone who can respond to and address an emergency. So those are some of the issues that come up, particularly as it relates to familiar status and families with children. I'm sorry that I sort of ran a little long in trying to address some of these things, but I was trying to present you with as much information related to the subject as possible. Any questions related to anything that I shared? Y'all have a good group.
How many complaints or cases do you all take per year?
How many? What do you say, anywhere from?
I would say that we take anywhere from 35 to 45 cases just for housing.
And is it any particular class or is it distributed across all of them?
The biggest that we see is race and disability, and like quickly following up, we've seen over the past few years the trend of source of funds is getting a lot more prevalent.
And the one thing I really didn't cover, and that at some point in time you want us to come back, as it relates to disability, the big issue is making requests for an accommodation as it relates to support animals. That's huge. And it's only recently that HUD has come out with some guidance, really stipulating and standing firm on the fact that housing providers, they do have the right to verify. So again, I don't want to take up any more of your time because that could take up another half an hour or so.
When we did fair housing testing, there was a property in the city that had abandoned dogs list, and German Shepherds and Pit Bulls, and it was
That's
a
an issue.
size, like over 16 pounds. They couldn't rent there, they had a finding because of that.
Yeah, that's a violation. So again, that's a separate issue altogether.
Yeah.
And I think
Bunch of years ago.
there's a section that's interesting
You
here
can't rent
around
based on size
reasonable
dogs.
modification and reasonable.
If it's a
Emotional support
if it's an
Oh.
emotional support or service animal.
Any, to have that process.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's the easiest thing.
So when
to
you
do.
have a finding, that's different than a complaint.
Well, the complaint is what the individual who's experienced some type of discriminatory practice files with the agency or municipality.
Okay.
The finding itself is after or subsequent to the investigation itself, where that agency has, collected evidence, interviewed people, and really done an intensive search of information to try to come to some conclusion as to whether there's been a violation.
And what I was talking about is we do fair housing testing, and they go out to properties in the city, and so they'll give us a report, and then they'll go to that property and.
Like an actor, is it an actor?
Yeah, it's like a secret shopper or something.
Yeah, two people of the same, one's black, one's white, and they both have the same qualifications. And then if there's, they're treating them differently, it could be disability. But in that case, it was a property in the city and, the fair housing tester went and gave them this finding and talked to them about.
And they can do the same with I worked with an agency a long time ago. And we can design a test, even around familiar status, where we send one tester in that says, okay, they have a child. And then we send a second tester in after it has no child. And then the only thing the methodology, the tester with the child is going to be a little bit better qualified than the one without the child, because we want to see how that housing provider responds. If they actually have a policy where it's discriminatory toward people with children. And so if that person tells a family with children, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have a vacancy, or they put extra conditions upon it, we can look at that information and say, okay, why? And then we will go in and ask that, and we'll investigate to see why they impose conditions upon that family, the tester family with children, or why they denied their housing under the circumstances when they didn't do the same to that tester that didn't have any children.
So in the case of the young woman in the boarding house, did she have to live in that boarding house all those years?
No, she soon moved out after she filed a complaint with us.
Okay.
And what she happened to do, she had her sister move, who was a couple of years older. And so she was able to get a place with her sister. during the course of the time that we investigated the complaint.
Cause that's a long time.
Yeah.
To wait.
But I'm gonna tell you something that people really aren't familiar with. A lot of times, they think if they file a complaint with their office, it turns in a dime. And filing a complaint with us is no different than filing a civil action in court based upon the violation of the Fair Housing Act. They still have a burden of proof, they still have to meet the elements of a prima facie case. And so we have to go through the process of gathering information and evidence to see whether we have sufficient evidence to prove up to show that there's a violation. Okay.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry I had to rush through the information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all been a good group.
It was nice.
You too.
Not too rowdy.
Some note in the newspaper.
That's right, we're all exhausted.